Welcome to True Talk on WMNF 88.5 with Ahmed and Samar. On today's program, we're going to be speaking to Dr. Muhammad al-Masri, who wrote an article about basically that Israel's far right is not alone to blame for the genocide that's being carried out in Gaza. And there are new opinion polls coming out of Israel that basically shows that the majority of Israeli society supports what's happening in Gaza and support the narrative that there are no innocents in Gaza, which is surprising many people. Majority of Israeli society agreeing with that. So that and more when we come back after this short break. This is True Talk on WMNF. Oh, it's supposed to play some music, but it's still me on the air. So, yeah, we'll be right back after this short break. Welcome to True Talk on WMNF 80.5. This is Ahmed and Samar. We have a good program and an important discussion today.
Yes, we do, Ahmed. I hope you are feeling better. You're still sounding not okay. Are you better?
Oh, my voice is not well.
Yeah.
I mean, it's still the remnants are still there, but yeah, I'm feeling better. But with
This
these
is,
things, sometimes it lingers.
I know it's good to know because, I had bronchitis myself. As usual, whenever I travel to the Arab world, I get that, but I'm getting better, alhamdulillah. Excuse me. An interesting choice of music, yeah, Ahmed. Kulthum.
Kulthum is she's an icon, of course, Egyptian singer performer, but very famous. A lot of her songs, they start out with a very long intro, prelude to the actual song, sometimes for 10, 15 minutes. What is that song called? I already forgot.
I think Alf Layla wa Layla, 1001 Nights. And she passed away in 73. But people still listen to her music and they love her. Very iconic and interesting. However, what we're going to be talking about, Ahmed, I can't believe that we are going to be talking about the same thing. Remember last week it was about the assassination of about 5 journalists in Gaza. And 2 days ago, Israel assassinated more journalists. So I'm very happy that we're going to be talking to a media expert, Dr. Muhammad al-Masri. He will join us soon. But I thought that the murder of Anas and all the journalists was a big thing, and the whole world was following it, at least on social media.
and
But to
condemned it.
go and condemned it, but to go again and do it and on camera
Yeah,
and
the
with
second time, which happened, I think, on Monday, that this was a journalist who used the fourth floor of a hospital because they think it's a safer place, and they go there to do their work and connect to Wi-Fi, and they have camera positions where they, you know, send their reports. And while the live cameras were streaming, and Israel bombed this location, killing people. And then when the paramedics and rescue workers came and others and more journalists are covering it, they bombed it a second time while it's live on television during news broadcast, which is shocking to everyone. And people are asking questions and demanding answers. And Israel came out and said, well, they don't, first came out and said, well, there was a Hamas camera that's there that they're using to monitor, and they wanted to bomb the camera, but they ended up killing all these other people. So, and then they keep giving different answers. And just yesterday in the United Nations, the interim ambassador of the United States to the UN in the Security Council was actually condemning Hamas for it, saying that people should condemn Hamas for using civilian infrastructure for their operations or whatever. I don't know if you saw that. So they're actually trying to twist it around as somehow it's not Israel's fault.
although Prime Minister of Israel came out and said, we apologize for this mishap. He called it a mishap. And then Channel 13, which is an Israeli channel in Hebrew, but they do have an English translation and service, they said, no, the soldiers are upset and the commanders in the field are upset for the Prime Minister saying that, because actually this is part of operating uh, manual or whatever they call it, procedures. So
Standard operating procedure.
exactly. So
So
uh,
this is their work there. They're meant to bomb these journalists. They intend it's if they've done it now hundreds of times, it can be every time that the only time that they apologize or say it's a mishap, but actually they don't apologize. They say it was a mishap, is when they get caught. Other times they go on and they justify and say that there were terrorists in the area, but these are journalists, and these are journalists that actually work, some of them, with international organizations like the Associated Press and other outlets. And I even saw that one journalist with Reuters resigned and cut up her badge and posted online saying that Reuters is complicit in the killing of journalists because they're covering it up.
yes, they're using very interesting language, and I think I'm going to keep that to Dr. Muhammad to talk about it because he writes extensively about it. But Ahmed, for instance, AP says freelancer about Abu Daqqa, the young single mom who
Mhm.
was murdered after she went up to see the after the first bombing. So she went up, took her camera, and then boom, she was killed. So to say they didn't even mention her name. They said, "Oh, we regret the fact that a freelancer was a part of the victims," and people got outraged and said, "Why don't you just say her name?"
Mhm.
Like
And
what?
she worked for them. She submitted things to the Associated Press and provided them coverage where others wouldn't have access, and they refused to say her name. It's really disgusting.
And said freelancer to kind of maybe legally or psychologically make her seem not real or not worthy of.
Yeah, it's like belittling her role. Like, oh, she's just a freelancer. But in reality, had this been an Israeli working for the Associated Press, they would have a vigil. They would have in memory of. They would, However, it's just a dehumanization. It goes to the extent of all these news outlets especially Western news outlets, that are really complicit in what's happening. If you're not covering the truth and twisting the words and lying to the public and the readers, then you're providing cover to the Israelis to continue doing what they're doing, killing innocent people. And that killing has to stop. And it's really disgusting that they continue to do that.
Yes, Ahmed, and there must be a reason why the media are sanitizing what is going on, because I think they know that the American public will not be quiet. Because just yesterday there was another US rep who has been to Israel. He was heckled and he was shouted at, and people were saying, "How much did you get from APAC? Why did you visit Israel?" And he started to blame Hamas again for probably your cold that you have. I'm not sure why you haven't blamed Hamas for it yet. But people are not quiet. People are getting mad. So imagine if our media would be covering what is happening. But I think we have Dr. Ahmed Al Masri with us. Ahmed, he just.
Muhammad Al Masri. I am Ahmed
Oh,
Bedier, but
you
he's
wrote it,
Muhammad Al
Ahmed.
Masri. Yeah,
Who wrote
well,
Ahmed Al Masri? You did.
no, yeah, maybe it's just a joke, but it's
Okay.
you're referring to what's on the screen, but
Yeah,
that's not.
because I am not multitasking at the moment, but let me apologize, Dr. Muhammad Al Masri, for saying you're Ahmed, but Ahmed is a nice name. And I think that both names are derived from the same root, Muhammad. Anyways, Dr. Muhammad Al Masri is an expert on media. He's a professor of media studies at the Doha Institute of Media, and he writes extensively about US media. He's originally from Minneapolis, so. Welcome to the show, Dr. Muhammad.
Thank you for having me. How are you guys doing?
I am doing very well, Dr. Muhammad, except that, like last week, Ahmed and I were talking about the assassination of Palestinian Gazan journalist Anas Sharif and another four journalists working for Al Jazeera, I think. But on Monday, it happened again. And
Hmm.
it happened in such a vicious way and so publicly that it drove the Prime Minister of Israel to say it was a mishap.
Hmm.
And there was something called double tap that you write about it. How is this possible? How is it possible to keep killing these journalists who work for foreign? The last time they work for the Associated Press, they work for Reuters. How is this possible, Dr. Al Masri?
Yeah, I was asked a similar question. I was on Al Jazeera a couple of days ago, and I was asked kind of a similar question. And the point that I made was that it's obvious, first of all, that Israel is at war with journalism. It doesn't want the world to know what's happening inside Gaza. I mean, that's been obvious since October 2023. But the larger point that I was trying to make was that um, Israel has learned that it can pretty much get away with anything. So it does these things because it can, and because it believes it serves its war objectives. But if you think back, and I know I've been on True Talk a number of times over the past 22, 23 months. If you think back to the other atrocities, um, I mean, there are atrocities every day, but if you think back to the some of the big ones that got a lot of press, like when they fired 300 rounds at Hind Rajab, a 6-year-old girl, or when they killed 15 paramedics and then buried them in a mass grave along with their ambulances, or when they killed the World Central Kitchen workers, or when they bombed the Al Ahli hospital in October of 2023. I could go on and on and on. There have been no consequences for any of these things. So I think Israel just feels as though it can do it because it's always going to get away with it. And to your point, this was a particularly heinous act because it was a it was what experts call a double tap uh, um, attack, and now we're learning that it was actually a triple tap attack. So what Israel does, and they've done this routinely for many years, is they carry out an attack and then they wait a few minutes, sometimes 5, 10, 15 minutes, until first responders are at the scene. These are usually paramedics, journalists, and just kind of good Samaritans who are there to help rescue people. And then they strike again. So they kill the first responders. And Israel does this routinely. So that's what they did in this particular case. And actually, most of the deaths were caused by the second and the third attacks, which were done basically simultaneously. So they launched two attacks at the same time, 17 minutes after the initial attack. So it's shocking, but I don't think we should be surprised necessarily because this has been happening for many months now.
Our media usually they like sensational footage, and they, they care about the images, and it affects them. How could they not be reacting, especially journalists? Like Ahmed was just talking about one journalist from Reuters publicly resigning because of how lame the media are and how they cover up. Like, how could the New York Times and CNN and all these stations we have here in the US not be covering this more extensively? I mean, would the Israeli embassy call them and threaten them, or how are they all complicit in this?
Mm-hmm. I think this is going to be one of the things that we're going to be talking about for many, many years. I wrote an article last year called, I don't remember the exact title, but I spoke about the death of Western journalism. And my point was that when you have journalism attacked in this way so openly and to the extent that Israel is doing this, and then you are met with basically silence from mainstream Western news outlets, then I think it kind of reveals Western journalism in its contemporary form to be a bit of a sham. All of this business about, speaking truth to power and being the voice of the voiceless and, presenting truth as it is and, being courageous and brave and so on and so forth. All of this is a bit of a sham, at least insofar as many, many journalists and news outlets in the West are concerned. Can we imagine for a moment that Russia killed, 245 or 246 Ukrainian journalists? What the reaction would be? I mean, if you'll remember, Samar and Ahmed, back in 2015, there was an attack carried out by Muslims against a French satirical newspaper called Charlie Hebdo. Everyone will remember that. And the reason they'll remember it is because this caused global outrage and it was front page news all over the world for weeks. And that attack killed 12 journalists, right? And of course, at the time, I thought, okay, well, it's good that journalists are standing in solidarity with their fellow colleagues. But here you have Israel systematically targeting journalism and journalists for 23 months, killing 245 or 246 journalists. And there's really almost no reaction. And to the extent that there is a reaction, I mean, you read some of the articles that cover some of these killings, and it almost reads like Israeli propaganda, right? So they'll say, an attack, Israel, several journalists were killed, but then they give Israel it's 15 seconds to explain what it did and why it did it, and it does this in almost every instance. You mentioned Anas al-Sharif, who was killed less than 3 weeks ago, along with several of his journalist colleagues when Israel decided to bomb a media tent in Gaza. Well, those news stories, and I would encourage people to look them up, they were basically just Israeli propaganda pieces. I looked at the stories in the New York Times and other outlets, and they're just repeating, regurgitating Israeli propaganda about Anas Sharif, basically smearing him as a terrorist. And there's supposed to be a level of, critical thinking and critical voice. I was trained in the West, and I worked as a journalist, and I taught journalism. Um, and nowhere did I ever learn that we are just supposed to regurgitate government propaganda, even when it's completely absurd. No one is buying. No one, at least not an educated journalist, should be buying that Anas Sharif was on television, 20 hours a day, and then somehow in the few remaining hours of the day was carrying guns on the front line and fighting against Israel. He's quite obviously not a fighter. So all of this was just nonsense. But to your point, I don't have a good answer. I think that we can try to offer up some explanations. I mean, different things have been suggested. One is that journalists in the West are terrified. They're terrified of the Israel lobby and pro-Israel politicians that will basically will criticize them, will attack them if they say anything, and sometimes they'll accuse them of being anti-Semitic if they say anything that's too critical of Israel. So that's one possible explanation. Another explanation is probably grounded in anti-Arab, anti-Palestinian, anti-Muslim sentiment and bigotry. There's a long line of research that looks at kind of double standards in Western reporting. So you look at victims of terrorism, for instance. There's a lot more sympathy in Western news reports for white Western Christian victims of terrorism than there is for Muslim, brown, and black victims of terrorism. I actually did a study on that a few years back. But there's a long line of research, even in the context of natural disasters. There's a long line of research that shows that Western media tend to be much more sympathetic with white people and Europeans and Westerners who suffer natural disasters. So that's another possible explanation. But I think we have to be very careful if we're going to try to explain it. We don't want to excuse it because, to be quite honest, it's completely inexcusable. And I thought it was brilliant what Jeremy Scahill of Dropsite News said. I think it was yesterday on Al Jazeera, and I would encourage people to go to YouTube and look up his interview. He was interviewed by Sarah Khairat on Al Jazeera, and he issued what I think is probably the most damning condemnation of Western journalists over their silence on Gaza.
Do you think, Dr. Al-Masri, if our media was much more fair, let's say, and was showing these images and this double or triple tap, it would make a difference with public opinion in the US?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, we have a long line of evidence and media studies that shows that news coverage and the way things are framed, um, they have tremendous impact on public perception and attitudes and even behaviors. So there's no question in my mind that it would make a difference. I think what's interesting is that despite some of this nonsensical coverage, and despite the almost constant demonization of Palestinians, you're still getting quite a lot of sympathy, relatively speaking, from Americans and Europeans for the Palestinians. And so now there was just a poll released, I believe it was just today or yesterday, by Quinnipiac University that shows that more Americans sympathize with Palestinians now than than Israelis. And if you look at it, if you parse through the data and look at uh, just Democrats, then the disparity is massive. And I think one reason why is because people are increasingly going to kind of alternative forms of media. They're not just relying on, the New York Times and CNN and the Washington Post anymore. This is not the 1980s. So people have access to social media. There are accounts on social media that are not associated with or affiliated with mainstream media outlets that are followed by millions and millions of people, and these images and posts end up circulating far and wide. And it's been, I think, too much for people to miss and too much for people to ignore. And I think people have seen through some of the media propaganda, and they've been able to kind of see this war, this genocide for what it is.
This is True Talk on WMNF 88.5 with Mohammed Al-Masri. Professor Al-Masri is expert in media studies. And I wanted to shift to an article you wrote earlier this month titled Blaming the Israeli Far Right Lets a Genocidal Society Off the Hook. And, you know, speaking because we mentioned about polling in America and Democrats, a lot of times of course, there's no criticism from the Republicans about what Israel's doing, but from time to time, you do get criticism from some Democrats, and oftentimes they point the finger at Netanyahu, Ben-Gvir, Smotrich, and others saying that these are radicals in the government, and some even say that it's Netanyahu is just trying to appease them, but he really doesn't feel that way. But the point is, they try to blame it on the current government. If there's a change in leadership in Israel, do you think that what's happening in Gaza would end, or is it deeper as far as the Israeli society support for what's happening in Gaza?
Um, it's pretty widespread support for what the government is doing in Gaza, with the exception of there are, of course, many Israelis who um, would like to see some kind of a deal, even if it's a temporary deal, to get the Israeli captives back. So there has been criticism of the government there, but on the larger issue of Palestinians and treatment of Gaza, there's broad agreement. You look at someone like Yair Lapid, who's the opposition leader in Israel. He's um, been very supportive, actually, of the war effort, by and large. Some minor disagreements notwithstanding, but he's been just kind of repeating Netanyahu's talking points, propaganda. Justifying the killing of civilians. Saying that Hamas is using Palestinian civilians as human shields, saying that Hamas is stealing humanitarian aid. These are basically the talking points of the Netanyahu government, but they've been regurgitated repeatedly by the opposition. Naftali Bennett is a prominent oppositional figure who's touted as maybe the next prime minister. He's also the former prime minister, and he has similar views. So there's broad support within Israeli politics. And then if you look at the polling data are terrifying, quite honestly. If you look at some of the polling data, um, there was a poll done a few weeks ago by the Israel Democracy Institute, beginning of this month, beginning of August, and they found that 79% of Israeli Jews are not so troubled or not troubled at all by reports of famine in Gaza. It's one of the things that I mentioned in the article that I wrote. And there are other really damning um, polling results. 65% of Israeli Jews believe in the existence of a modern day Amalek. Amalek is from the Bible. This is a biblical population that was meant to be completely annihilated, including women, children, and babies. 82% of Israeli Jews support the mass expulsion of Palestinians out of Gaza. right? 47% of Israeli Jews openly endorse the killing of all Gaza residents. And then there was a poll just from the last couple of days um, that says that 76% of Israeli Jews either fully agree or partly agree with the idea that there are no innocent people in Gaza. So and I could go on. The really from there have been polls done since October of 2023 now, almost 2 years, and they're quite damning, and they show that there's very little sympathy uh,
Hmm.
with Palestinians, and to the extent that some Israeli Jews want an end to the war, it's because either they believe that the war is harmful for Israeli society and politics, or they want the captives back.
Right. I think the poll that you cited or you mentioned that came out in the past couple of days is by a a research organization in Israel called Accord, ACHORD. And its director basically said, in a long post on X that these findings are very troubling, and that, like you said, 76% of the Jewish public partially or fully agree that there are no innocents in Gaza. And then he writes on to say that there are indeed significant gaps between opposition and coalition, but this is overall society. So even when you go with the current leadership, it's even higher, but this includes the opposition. So this is overall society in Israel. 76% think that there are no innocents in Gaza. Um, that would, that would include children and women and others. So it's definitely, like you said, there is wide support research that shows that Israeli society as a whole, or a majority of it, supports what's happening in Gaza. But you don't hear those things reflected in the policies here. Oftentimes, you keep hearing the same talking points from the politicians saying that somehow Israel, the only democracy in the Middle East, is under attack by all of its neighbors, and they have a
Mhm.
right to defend themselves. Um, for our
Well,
listeners who might be, yeah, go ahead.
on that point, I think it's interesting that American media tend to sometimes be more pro-Israel than Israeli media. You know where you'll find these polling results is in Israeli media. You will not find these polling results in mainstream American media. They just don't. It doesn't garner coverage. And then
Why is that?
there there have also been a number of TikTok and social media trends where Israelis, just ordinary Israelis, are mocking Palestinians for their suffering. They're in brown face, and they make themselves look disheveled, and they mock their suffering. They're really awful to describe. I mean, and these are videos that have been liked and viewed and reposted many thousands of times, multiple trends, and these are published on this is written about in Israeli media, but this is not covered in mainstream American media. For the most part, it's largely ignored. And I think, and to answer your question, I think it has to do with certain editorial policies. There's a lot of pressure from higher ups at news organizations. Both ways. There's pressure uh, to sort of not make Israel look so bad, because the minute there's a critical news report written about or published or broadcast about Israel, there's a ton of flack that ends up coming back to the news organization, and that's just established fact. You can talk to any journalist that has worked in mainstream American news media. The Israel lobby is very powerful, and one of their main kind of arms is the media arm, and so they monitor these reports very very closely. Another thing is this, and this is a point that's been made in the scholarship. There's a fundamental imbalance in sourcing. So there's kind of a structural problem with the way mainstream American news outlets report on Israel Palestine. You'll typically see a 2-to-1 or 3-to-1 disparity between Israeli sources and Palestinian sources. And then if you broaden out a little bit to include pro-Israel sources and pro-Palestinian sources, so a pro-Palestinian source would be like, an Arab leader, for instance. A pro-Israeli source would be, an American president, for instance, because American presidents are very pro-Israel. Then the disparity becomes even larger. So this is at the basic structure, the structural level, because news reports almost always end up reflecting what the sources say, and that's just how modern journalism works. Certainly in most of the Western world, right? It's not opinion or journalist or reporter analysis as much as it is just a reflection of what the sources are saying. So if you have a piece and you consult with 3 Israeli sources and 1 Palestinian source, well, or whatever the disparity is, you're going to end up with a pro-Israel frame. And then if you dig a little bit deeper, you find that when Palestinian and Israeli sources are mentioned in the same news report, the Israeli source is given prominence. They're mentioned first, and they're mentioned more prominently. And by the way, there are numerous studies that have measured this empirically, going back to the 1980s. This issue of sourcing.
Okay, well,
Also,
yeah, Summer.
a follow-up to what Dr. Al-Masri and to our listeners were talking to Dr. Mohammed Al-Masri, who's a professor of media studies at the Doha Institute in Qatar. Professor Al-Masri, also the language used and the phrasing, for instance, whenever there is talk about casualties, they will say the Hamas-run government or the
Mhm.
Hamas-run Ministry of Health, as if to take the credibility. I mean, even if they are quoting a source, they insert the word Hamas as if to take
Yeah,
away.
this is what the scholars call a qualifier. So there are all kinds of qualifications for Israeli violence and Palestinian casualties, but you don't find it. The opposite is not true, basically, and this has also been measured empirically. In fact, I just finished a study about 2 weeks ago. It's currently under review, so I can't say too much about it. But this is one of the findings that we see over and over again in the literature. Um, and one of the things that's interesting as well is when they talk about some news outlets, not all, but some news outlets, when they talk about Palestinian children, they've kind of adopted the Israeli language. So Israel doesn't talk about Palestinian children. They talk about people of fighting age. And if you do a little bit of digging, and I did some digging on this a few weeks back, Israel considers fighting age to be 13 to 55. So Israel, if Israel kills a 13-year-old boy, for instance, or a 55-year-old man, they just assume by default that it was a fighter and it's officially classified as a terrorist. And we know that because Israeli uh, soldiers have told and commanders have spoken with Plus 972 magazine, which is an Israeli publication, anonymously off the record about how they count, terrorist deaths in Gaza, right? But so news outlets now are saying Palestinians under the age of 18. As opposed to, it was just a report in the New York Times this month that said Palestinians under the age of 18. And it pointed out that Israel says that some of these people are fighters in the war. So there's an attempt to kind of justify even the killing of children. And as you all have been talking about in some of your shows over the past several months, um, this has been a devastating war on children, right? We're talking about the war on journalists, but it's been a war on children as well. The UN says that 69% of the people that are killed are women and children, and that the age group that is most likely to be affected is the 5 to 8 year old age group, because these are kids that don't run as fast as adults, and they are not as easily carried by their parents as young kids are.
It's really disturbing. And, every time we say the word war, I always have to put it within quotes because it's not it's not really a war when one side is just trapped in an open air prison and you're just shooting at them with the most sophisticated weapons and only one
And
side
they
is
don't
getting
have
killed.
and only one side has a state and only one side has an army.
Yeah, only one, exactly. The other side is just, people that are insurgents or others. And they don't have those, they don't have tanks, they don't have weapons that are sophisticated. They have, they call them rockets. I'm not even sure if they're launching anymore, but they're really like homemade things. So we only hear really numbers on the Palestinian side in Gaza that are getting killed, civilians, innocent people. I don't think there's anyone getting killed on the Israeli side. Uh, Correct me if I'm wrong, but since the beginning, when October 7th happened, and we can debate about the numbers all day long, but that's when the killing happened on the Israeli side, and the captives taken. But since then, it's just been just killing Palestinians every day by the hundreds. And even when they go try to fetch aid or food, and you're talking about innocent people. And the saddest part, like you said, the most vulnerable are those the age group. How old were they? 5 to 8.
5 to 8, yeah.
Yeah, because like you said, 5-year-old, they're a little bit more difficult to carry, and you can't run with them as much, and they don't have the speed to run away as like adults can. So imagine 5 and 8-year olds just being the target of this, and like you said, they're behaving like Amalek, and this is what Netanyahu invoked at the beginning, the Amalek,
Hmm.
that basically killing everyone, that
Hmm.
everyone is fair game, and this is a way to empty out Gaza. It's so obvious. You've been saying this from the first weeks after October 7th. I have also, Samar and I have been talking about it, but no one, like, it's every time a new atrocity happens, like a surprise. So as you end up, as we wrap up here with you, do you have any final words to say? Like, where are things going from here?
Well, yeah, it's heading toward Greater Israel, which is the vision that the Israeli leadership and many Israeli citizens have. It's an expansionist state. I think everybody knows by now that
Well, some of
Israel's
our listeners may not know. So, what is
well, Israel
the
does
Greater
not.
Israel?
Israel does not define its borders officially. It's the only country in the world that does not have defined borders, and it's an expansionist vision. The biblical interpretation that many in Israel have is that all of the land from the Euphrates River in Iraq to the Nile River in Egypt is the land of Israel that is talked about in the Bible. So right now, obviously, Israel's been at work for a very long time at kind of conquering the West Bank slowly but surely. They've now established control over 65% or so of the West Bank. They have about 800,000 illegal settlers living in the West Bank, and that number is set to grow exponentially because they've just announced a new massive settlement block. Um, so that's the West Bank, and obviously they're working on Gaza. They've said it openly. They've said that their plan is to take Gaza over completely, and they're trying to move the Palestinians first to the south, and then ultimately to get rid of them, to get them out of Gaza. They're lobbying other countries, Sudan, Somaliland, and other countries to try to take the Palestinians in, and then they're working on other parts of the region, right? So if you look at the map, the Greater Israel is supposed to include, large swaths of Iraq, Lebanon, Syria, Saudi Arabia, Egypt, Jordan. And so now they're working on what they're calling David's Corridor in southern Syria. So this is a huge strip of land that goes across the entire southern border of Syria into Iraq. And then they're also occupying parts of, obviously, other parts of Syria and Lebanon. And I think they're patient and pragmatic in the sense that there's an understanding that this is not going to be achieved overnight, but they're working at it. And so far, the international community and the Arab states apparently are just willing to let this all happen.
I would be surprised for that. I mean, yeah. So, but anyway, that's for another discussion about this Greater Israel. I want to thank Mohammed Al-Masri for being with us today on True Talk. And if you want to review his article that we were referring to, blaming the Israeli far right, lets a genocidal society off the hook, you can find it on Middle East Eye. Thank you so much for joining us, Mohammed.
Thank you, guys. Take care.
Take care. So, Samar, this Greater Israel project is continuing, and I mean, the thing is, if you look at since the establishment of the Israeli state in 1948 until now, it's just been expanding. And regardless whether it's liberal government, conservative, Likud, regardless of political party, they just continue to expand, grab more land, regardless of who's there. So this seems to be the plan all along. And if you read the early writings of the founders of Zionism and the early founders of the Israeli state, this has been their plan, to try to remove the people off their land, the Palestinians, and take over and work somehow towards Greater Israel. They've always never really talked about this Greater Israel project, but Netanyahu, in a recent interview, said that he believes in this and that he has some sort of higher calling and that this is a spiritual fight, even though he's not really a religious guy who doesn't even observe kosher. But somehow he's, invoking that this Greater Israel, he's hinting that that's basically his goal. But how can Jordan and Egypt and other surrounding Arab countries go along with this? I would be surprised, aren't they? Shouldn't they be freaked out?
They should, Ahmed. And he actually said that like he invokes God. And, it is forbidden for us Muslims to invoke God when we talk about politics. But when it comes to Netanyahu, obviously it's okay. But, and they are publishing, maps. And he had a map with his hand, the Prime Minister of Israel, when he was, I think, last year at the UN. Yes, these surrounding countries should be questioning, their borders and the continuity of their own nation states. But obviously, they are client states. But Israel is a colonial project, and I think we've had Dr. Rashid Al-Khaldi several times. We've had him one time, but we do repeat his lecture because it's so important. I mean, his interview with us, Ahmed, because he talks about the 100 years war on Palestine, and he explains it's a Western colonial project, and this is why the European countries and the US support Israel. And what is interesting, Ahmed, and this is something that you and I, maybe we should be talking about it, because whenever there is like a discussion of democracy, and it's the only democracy in the region, they always allude to the fact that they are Western. Western ideals, Western democracy, Western this and that. And people need to ask, so if they are Western, what are they doing in the heart of the East, in the middle of the East?
Exactly. That's a good point. Like if they are, and they're even part of what is that famous show that is that has the mute where they compete for
Eurovision.
Yeah, Eurovision. It's like, singing or whatever. And then Israel is part of it. That's in Europe. It's not in the Middle East.
Jordan and Egypt are like adjacent, and Lebanon and Syria, they have borders. They share borders. So, sorry, Lebanon and yeah, Syria and Jordan and Egypt. So why are these countries not part of the Eurovision music competition? So if you are
Mhm.
Western, what are you doing in the heart of the Arab world? Maybe this is why the region is not very accepting, uh, of this colonial project. But Dr. Muhammad always raises very interesting points, and I wish he had more time because language is so important. Like you and I were talking, when they say freelancer, or when they say combatant age, or when they do not say the word genocide, or when they
They don't call it a settlement or a colony when it's,
yeah.
they say a neighborhood about an Israeli settlement that's on the land of Palestinians. It's not even within Israel.
And for instance, when they say the controversial project
Mm.
about extend building new settlements on agriculture land that was stolen and being taken from Palestinians, and the young man Musallat who was killed, he was killed because he was objecting, or he was trying to defend the piece of agriculture land in the West Bank that our media call it controversial. No, it's theft of land. It's against international law. It's against this Western international law that was created by Western countries, especially the Roma Convention and the UN and the League of Nations. So these words are so important, Ahmed, and it just flies sometimes, and people don't pay attention to it. I'm glad we have WMNF and we have True Talk to talk about these.
We have it so far. I mean, we do have it, but the government and this administration is trying to pull funding. They see that public and community radio is a threat. They're defunding NPR and PBS and community radio stations. And that's why we rely on listener supporters. And, this is what happens. If you get rid of the media, if you get rid of journalism, if you get rid of independent media, then all you have left is state media. But that's one of the reasons why Netanyahu and his government and the Israeli government does not allow Western media to be in Gaza. They don't allow any media to be there. So people have to rely on Palestinians in Gaza to report, because they don't want the media to see the truth and to report the truth, what's happening, to see for their own eyes the destruction, the death and destruction is being caused. The whole place is decimated. The amount of destruction and death. I mean, the official number is something like close to 60,000. Oh, what is the number now as far as the official number? But it's really much higher.
62,000, but that's not counting people who are still under the rubble, because you do not have the equipment to take them from under the rubble.
But some people are saying that the number could be high as 200, 300,000 people based on, the images and the destruction that they've seen. So it could be that high, and they're just, continuing to cover it up. There's no way to actually count, the death of people there.
A relative of mine yesterday was panicking and calling my husband because he's running out of his blood pressure medication. And I was
Hmm.
thinking, to call
This
the,
is someone in Florida, you mean?
yeah, just, I mean, a
Hmm.
neighbor. And, my husband is a doctor, so he thought maybe he can call the pharmacy and ask for 2 or 3 pills just for an
Hmm.
emergency, panicking. And I'm thinking, what do people with blood pressure do in Gaza?
Yeah.
Or people who
They,
have diabetes, type 1 diabetes, like you have to have insulin. Like, oh my God. It just like it hit me last night because he called my husband at night panicking, and he has a pill for last night, but he doesn't have a pill for today, this morning. And it just hit me, Ahmed, so hard. Like,
yeah, it is. And let's imagine they don't have any of those things, and people on dialysis and
they're
stuff. This
bombing the
is,
hospitals. They just bomb I would not go to a hospital that was bombed 3 times in a row.
No hospital, no place is safe in Gaza, and God, help them. But we need to do what we can to continue raising awareness about what's happening there and to demand our elected officials do something about it. I mean, this is all that we can do. But we're out of time here at True Talk on WMNF. This is WMNF Tampa. The Scoop is next. We'll see you at the same time, same place next Thursday here at noon